Hi, everybody. Welcome back to U.S. History. So today is our last section of notes for unit number 3, meaning your notes are due at the end of this lecture. So to kind of wrap us up, we're going to talk about the rise of Woodrow Wilson into office and his contributions going forward. So go ahead and get your notes out for the final time, and let's get started. So starting in 1912, the presidential election saw multiple candidates running for office. This included a current president, a former president, and an academic that entered politics 2 years earlier. So that being said, our major players are President Taft as our current president, Teddy Roosevelt as the former president, and then Woodrow Wilson as the academic. Believing that President Taft had failed, former President Roosevelt offered to throw his hat into the ring and run for president again. Now, he had already served 2 terms in office, but it's important to note at this point in U.S. history, there is no term limits on the president yet. Eventually, the election came down to Roosevelt and the newcomer, Woodrow Wilson. As expected, the Republican vote was split between Taft and Roosevelt, which allowed Wilson to win the presidency. We see this a lot when you see multiple people running from the same party, especially if they decide to run as a third-party candidate. You're then splitting the vote of that party, and then you're letting another party take advantage of that because they're not divided. So Wilson's administration passed a number of reforms being made by the government, the biggest one being that of income taxes. Now, prior to this, income taxes had not really been collected. And under the Constitution, there are 2 types of taxes. You have your direct tax and your indirect tax. Your direct taxes are imposed directly on a person or their property. Think like property taxes that your parents would pay every year. Indirect taxes are a tax that someone pays, but the tax burden falls on somebody else. And on top of that, Wilson and Congress passed a new kind of tax, an income tax. This is a tax based on the net income of a person or business. It's also under the Wilson administration we see the first federal tax returns. So especially for you guys as you get older, you'll start filing taxes every year and getting some of that money back. Wilson also did a lot for the banks by passing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. This created regional reserve banks and expanded the power of the Federal Reserve. That's why today there's a branch of the Federal Reserve in Kansas City. So just like Roosevelt and to some extent Taft, Wilson had kept the ball rolling on eliminating trust in American business. Wilson went after those using unfair practices, just like the 2 predecessors had. He was the first president to sign into law a child labor law that prohibited anyone under the age of 14 being employed in the factories and making sure that they went to school. Now, legacy and limits, progressivism could only go so far. Just like any movement, it did have its limits. The biggest failures were dealing with racial and religious discrimination. But its legacy left a new role for the government. Prior to Wilson taking office, most presidents and Americans did not expect the government to pass laws to protect workers or regulate business. But following Wilson's time in office, the American people expected the government to take a more active role in regulating the economy, regardless of whether or not they wanted them there. It was just the expectation. Now is if you do not have any missing assignments, you're going to be working on the review guide. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.